Hi, this is Charlie Brake. We're here with Computer Music, just representing Cygnus mastering and showing you a little run through of what I do for mastering a drum and bass track.
Right, so you're now mastering for Cygnus. Tell us a bit about Cygnus for anyone that doesn't know, and what you're doing for them, and
Yeah.
how you came to work for them.
Well, basically they're a digital distribution company, but they offer a lot of other services as well. And one of those services was DJ mailouts, which is kind of how I hooked up with them originally. So they were doing a DJ mailout of my last album, and just through chatting, I said, "Oh, I do mastering, for a few years, and I'm sort of trying to, do more of it, basically." And they offer a mastering service with their, for their clients, basically. So they were looking for someone that did, drum and bass and other dance music, and that's how we hooked up, really, to sort of offer a new service through their system.
Cool. Okay, so and that's how it came about then. You were just chatting to them.
Yeah, we were just chatting, and they said, we're going to try and launch this new sort of system on the web page, because they've got a whole kind of shop system which is really, really good for labels, so they can kind of go into the shop and get all their services, PR, artwork, mastering, get everything done for release, so it's all kind of in-house. So I knew they'd have a lot of clients off the bat, which is, part of sometimes the struggle with mastering is getting clients and dealing with them, which is what's good with their system. It's all kind of integrated, so there's less phone calls and emails, and it's a nice smooth operation for getting a good turnaround of work, basically.
Cool. So obviously you're mostly known as a producer, drum and bass producer.
Yeah.
So in terms of the the creative process, that's obviously you coming up with musical ideas, and there's a lot of creativity. So how do you sort of, mastering is quite technical, quite impartial. So how do you sort of wear those different hats? How do you bridge that gap?
Well, I think it is getting more blurred these days, or for even the last 10 plus years, because the Loudness war happened. Everyone got software, and it is a blurred line. But it's I went to sort of probably about 100 mastering sessions through all the vinyl days, and made a point of learning what I could from every session I attended. And I think it's just putting, like you said, a different hat on, and just trying to, it's mastering a lot of its first impressions, and that's kind of why I don't master my own stuff generally, and why it is, even if you're a great mixer or engineer, it just helps to have someone else's ears to just notice those problems straight away that you're going to often miss because you're so attached with it, or you've heard it so much. So I think that's the trick, is just hearing it for the first couple of times, and you just spot the problems. And that's the appeal to me, is still fixing things and trying to make it better. So that's the enjoyable part, basically.
So you don't master your own music then?
I mean, I have done, and I can get a decent master done if I needed to. But if it is an album project or something that you want, that's going to be around for years to come, I'd trust someone else to have a more objective viewpoint. So I know a lot of people say that you can't really master your own music. You can, but if you've got the choice, I'd still say to someone, give it to someone else who can hear it more clearly, really.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you were saying earlier about people, mastering engineers you've worked with in the past. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, yeah, the first session I went to was with Stuart at Metropolis, who's been around for years and done all sorts of stuff. And then I met Bo Thomas at 1087, who is also in London. I grew up in London there. So yeah, I just went to countless sessions with him, and he actually offered me a job about 12 years ago to do mastering, but also kind of dissuaded me from doing it, because he was like, you want to capitalise on your tunes and spend time doing that. But I've stayed friends with him for years, and he's just taught me loads of stuff and been really helpful, kind of, like I said, attending all these sessions and just seeing how it's done, and massively helped improve my production. And that's still what I enjoy about mastering. It does help your production if you know what's going to happen at the end. And once you start doing it and doing other people's tracks, you see common problems or common solutions to problems. And yeah, that's the fun thing about it. It's still a big learning curve to take back to production and mixing. So yeah, he's been a big help, and big ups to Bo for all the knowledge he's imparted on me.
Cool. So I mean, so you say you've been to a lot of mastering sessions, and you know you've learned that experience. So how has that influenced you and your actual productions? I know we're talking about mastering today, but I think it'd be interesting to sort of hear how.
Well, it all ties in. Yeah, I mean it's. I think, which we'll come to later in the video. When you had to cut to vinyl, there was even more kind of sort of rules and kind of drawbacks of that format that you had to be aware of, and I think that helped me get better mixes for digital in the future. After that, when we still cut vinyl and I still mix for vinyl, but those principles really help for digital, which is severe top end just messes up vinyl. It makes the cutting head jump, and you get all sorts of problems with the lathe. So there's lots of things to do with sort of crazy width, crazy top end, and basically giving a smoother mix will come back better on vinyl. And so that's been a big inspiration for my mixes and for mastering and how to sort of deal with those problems. So yeah, that's been a big help, is sort of knowing what to avoid at that stage, so that later down the line you get a better result back from mastering. So yeah, that's part of the curve basically.
So for those who don't know, or those that do know, what would you describe the process of mastering as? What is mastering to you?
I think it's just it's the final pass, the kind of the last chance to some extent to fix any problems, or it's the last chance just to add it's the final polish basically. Yeah, so that's how I see it really. It is just the final polish is probably the best answer. And for a long time, I kind of hoped mastering might fix some mistakes and problems with the mix, which it does. But obviously, the more you do it, and you hope to fix those before. So it really is just the final polish rather than a kind of get out of jail free card. But it can help when you need a little tweak fixed. So yeah, final polish is probably the best sort of answer.
Yeah, I think it's probably good to just have a chat about your sort of setup you've got here.
Yeah.
Because we were chatting earlier, you've worked in high-end studios, and now you've got a home setup.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to sort of have a chat about that, break down the sort of gear you're using, the signal path, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I moved back home. It just I had a fully treated room, but actually didn't get as good results as I was hoping for, and this room's worked out really well. Possibly just luck with the dimensions and the treatment that I've done, but it's a good space. So yeah, it runs off a Mac Pro. It's RME sound cards and a Ferrofish AD converter, and then comes out to the Neumann KH310s, and then I've got some little Yamaha HS5s, which are just useful. They're kind of not NS10s, but similar. They've got that no bass sort of and pretty harsh mids, so they're quite a good sort of cross-reference point to AB with. And there is other outboards, some Warm Audio Pultecs. I've got some Elysia rack stuff and a few other bits. This Roger Mayer tape emulator is another good one that I do use for mastering sometimes. So there are some other outboard options. But these days it can work, but often if you've got a good mix, what you get in the computer's so high quality now, that is what a lot of people use for mastering. So it sounds great, to be fair. Cool. So that's pretty much it. And the Audi's headphones, I've got a couple of pairs of them. They're always a good safety check and just for a good headphone reference. So I like to flick between a few different monitoring sources, because I think you just can't hear it in enough different ways to really see what's going on. So that's always handy.
Do you have a particular approach in terms of, are you mainly on the big monitors and then you just sometimes check on the smaller ones, or how does
I
that
think,
work?
yeah, more that. I mean, the Neumanns are just so nice to listen to. They're not flattering, but they're not painful like a few other speakers I've had. So you can get through long time with them, and they don't fatigue you too much. So yeah, it's probably more flicking to the other ones. For production at night when I'm working on my stuff, the headphones are great for rolling out in a night session. But and the other great thing about these Neumanns is the bass responds really well even at low volumes. So I don't listen loud as much as I used to. You flick up loud for a bit, but mainly it's quite a nice, standard listening level.
Have you learned that the hard way then? You used to monitor loud and now you've sort of...
Yeah, and it was the last studio I was in, it was so treated that it didn't feel loud, and you realise you're actually like 100 dBs because it's so treated. You just keep cranking it to sort of feel more. So that's something, again, I'm kind of preferring working here. It's you don't have to crank it to sort of feel it. And yeah, like you said, I've kind of learnt the hard way going back after sessions with ringing ears like a club set, and that just is crazy, really. So, and a big thing which results in mastering, or that I'm aware of, is distortion that you can create if it's too pushed or if a track, and it's just much easier to hear distortion quieter, and so that's a big thing that I've been aware of from actually working quieter, is hearing the little distortion issues. So that's another positive of turning it down, really.
And headphones are always great for that as well, aren't
Yeah. I mean, they reveal a lot. So yeah, mixing it all up definitely helps.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Before we get into the video, any
Yeah.
sort of plug-in wise, do you have sort of go-tos?
Yeah, there's a batch here. I mean, we'll sort of go through them on the setup. I mean, I've got most of what you need. The UAD stuff's great. There's some other, Fab Filter and a few Waves things. I don't use them as much now. So there's loads out there, and pretty much all you need. But generally, I find, which we'll see with the session, it's just a kind of trial and error of just auditioning each one and seeing which limiter, for example, works best on which track. Same with EQ. But I've got my handful of little favourites that generally do the job. So,
any
yeah.
sort of smaller sort of plug-in manufacturers? Any sort of hidden gems that you use? Any kind of maybe lesser known ones, or?
Acoustica is less known. I mean, they're doing really good stuff. I was maybe a little bit late to the party, but I think they've really got a good range now. So that not that many people know about them, but they're a great company with mastering grades and a different approach to modelling than most other companies. So they're quite an interesting one. And I do have lots of random other little plugins, but more production stuff. For mastering, it is mainly the sort of main big hitters of UAD, Isotope, and Fab Filter, probably.
Cool. So you've sort of prepared some stuff for us that
Yeah.
fit us in.
Yeah, basically what I've done that I just thought might be kind of useful, I've got a track, it's produced by myself and DLR, called No Idea, and I just loaded the project back up and messed up a few channels to try and just sort of show some of the issues that you often get in mastering, and that I've learned the hard way from sort of making those mistakes, and just kind of explaining how they can be sort of detrimental when you come to mastering, basically. So I'll give you a quick clip of the pre-master of the sort of good mix. And then on this other version, basically what I've done is I've turned up the kick a bit much, I've turned the hats up, and I've taken a bit of the low cutting off the subs. And that's just a few of the things that I often notice where there's too spiky high end, too kind of lumpy low end, which... And I thought it was a good thing, because on first impressions, it might actually sound better than the other version. because it's brighter and this sounds a bit, in a way, muddier. So, and I think that's, like I was saying to you earlier about the vinyl thing, it was much better to supply a bit of a duller track for mastering and get that top end brought up than to give in a really bright track that essentially you might have to lose top end on. And so that's always the approach I've taken, is to leave a bit of tops available to boost on the mastering, but you want a really consistent top end. And that's something, the screen's a bit grey because we're on the screen capture, but if you have a look at the analyzer, this has got, the good version has got more of a rolled off tops, where this version's got these higher spikes around 10, 12K.
But initially, I suppose it does sound a bit more
impressive. It sounds a bit more impressive. So then what I thought would highlight this is if you just whack a limiter just to get the level up to what you might be doing, you then really start to hear it sort of fall apart more. So I'll just add, for the sake of it, a Pro L about, we'll give it a quick go and just... Okay, so this is the bad mix. So the good one you can hear doesn't get as loud initially, but it doesn't start farting on that low end, which is what the other one with the too loud kick. That's where you get a lot of problems once you start limiting, is the low end starts distorting. And obviously there's ways to fix that, which will kind of like hit on a little bit of how to sort of, use mastering to address some of those problems. But for me, listening to that, I'd want to start taking things away now to fix what the limiter's bringing out, essentially. Whereas the duller one, it's not getting as hurt as much by the limiter.
So you can push it a little bit more.
So you can push it a bit more and bring things out rather than pull things away. And so that's kind of how I try and approach mixdowns, and hope the kind of tracks you get from mastering you can bring things out of, rather than actually, and there's nothing wrong with taming some things, but yeah, that's something to notice.
So I guess if you're mastering, if you're having to tame this kind of top end, it's not quite as sort of additive and
that's it.
Nice sounding, really.
So probably, with something like this now, I'd probably, which again was one of the tips I was taught, is you don't really want to start messing too much with the dynamics of the track, but you may have to with this, maybe some multi-band compression on that high end to kind of even it out. And then again, once you're starting to do that, it's not ideal, because you're sort of changing what the producer wanted. And these are the sort of issues that I get. I think, does he want that hi-hat really bright and spiky? Was that a creative choice, or was that just a mistake, or kind of not noticed at the time? So you kind of got to decide. And generally the approach I take with mastering is just to make it how I'd want to hear it, which is sort of is my taste of what's right. So you got to try and not go too far with that, otherwise it can get a bit out of hand. But that's the approach I'd take. So probably with this, a few of these tricks then basically to fix what we do with that kind of a little bit out of hand master. I mean, generally I'd flick through a few limiters to hear the kind of characteristics they've got, and it's usually between these four: the fab filter, the ozone maximizer, the UAD precision limiter, and the UAD Oxford. And sometimes it'll be a combo of a couple of them at less extreme settings to kind of get a bit of the benefits of both of them.
So what is it you're listening for when you're comparing limiters?
I mean, it's tricky because obviously each one's got its own settings, and there's a lot you can tweak to change each one. It's more knowing what each one to me sort of sounds like. So in my head, I find the fab filter, the Pro L, is quite round and smooth sounding, but a bit kind of, what would be the word, kind of fluffy. It's not as detailed as the Ozone Maximizer, which is more kind of crisp and punchy, but can be a bit blocky sounding. The UAD one's quite mushy, old school and sort of soft sounding, and the Oxford's kind of just like a bit of all of those in one, but doesn't handle, it pumps quite easily, so it's not one that I would generally do a lot of makeup game with. It's more of a little tickle on the end of a little bit of sheen. So you can kind of almost hear when you hear the track, if it's got quite a lot of kick drum and it's quite kind of punchy, the Fab filter might eat that up a bit nicer, whereas almost a track that needs a bit of punch and a bit of aggression, the Ozone's, you know, more that kind of thing. So it's kind of, and you just sort of try them and you can hear generally on the, you know, the default setting, that gives you a good judge of the kind of average sound of it, basically. So if I put that, and again, then it gets confusing because you've got 4 modes in the Ozone, you've got 4 modes in, or 3 modes, 4 modes in the Pro L as well. So it's a lot of trial and error, and that's kind of really the thing with mastering. There's not loads of different things you're using. It's just trying to find really the right setting on the right one that takes the time.
When you put the limiter on during the mastering process, do you just get everything else sorted first and then put the limiter on, or do you sometimes put the limiter on first and then go backwards?
Yeah, it is a kind of egg and chicken thing. Generally, I actually put it on first, sort of to get it to the rough level you want, and then start addressing the problems, which is maybe a backwards way of doing it, but it's because people are going to want generally the masters loud. Luckily with Cygnus, they've got a nice feature where you can choose for a dynamic or a loud master, and again that might change the process. So I might just do more of an EQ first and then limit it if they want a dynamic sound, and you get it sounding nice rather than just loud. Whereas loud, it's more getting it loud and then fixing the problems caused by that major sort of level increase.
Cool. So when a job comes through to you, it's one of the
It's labelled one of the two, and most people so far have clicked dynamics, which is nice, so you don't have to kind of slam the hell out of it. And that is harder work for mastering because it's just shouldn't basically be that loud, and you're kind of defying sense a little bit to get it that loud. But I know a lot of people want that, and I make stuff pretty loud, so I know what it's like. But
and in terms of dynamic and loud, that's quite subjective. So do you have a set sort of levels that you aim for?
I've got a nice, I mean, I use this RME meter, which I think it doesn't light up because we're a little bit dark. You might see it, but yeah, if I have the tune playing, I'll turn the speakers down. As it basically is now, that's sort of loud but not slammed, but still got a bit of dynamic. So I sort of would, for a nice master, would aim for this at roughly sort of -5 RMS here. Everyone's meters all look different, and on the computer you'll get a different reading. It's a bit subjective, the actual number, but I think it's just getting used to a meter you know. So I know these ones and know what different music looks like on them. And you know, there's a lot of music I'm getting now, which on these meters is literally like -1 RMS, which is crazy loud. But that comes into other things you might ask about mixing into the master as you're making the tune, and obviously people have done that to get it that loud, because you're going to be hard pushed to just mix a tune really quietly and then master it that loud. You're going to have to do some tricks to get the level up there. But I think in all the circles I'm going in with people I know, that everyone's realising it is the detriment of the music, and when you go on a sound system that's already loud and already hitting their limiters and things, it's sort of pointless to have it that loud. So I know a lot of people that I work with and know, everyone's backing off a bit, and it's just get it to sound fat and nice rather than just to look good on the meters. So that's what I try and do with the mastering now, is not just hit a number for the sake of it. It's more just get the sound, you know, that sounds best. Okay, so I'll just do sort of a couple of minutes on this bad master and just sort of try and fix a little bit of what's wrong with it. So with this limiter going, it's not doing a great deal. It's only pulling about a dB or so reduction, but you can hear where the kick drum is too lumpy, which is partly because it's too loud in the mix. So what I'd possibly do is just use a little bit of multiband to pull that back in. We've got too many slots. I'm just going to remove a plug-in. So sort of looking at this meter and on the other meters, you can see the kick around sort of 100, 120. That is kind of the loudest thing on the meters basically, which is kind of why it's not that separated from the sub, and that was the kind of problem I wanted to create on that mix to try and sort of fix basically in this session. And to me that's already sounding a bit better. I'd tweak away for a while, and again, same with this thing of use 2 or 3 different multi-bands and see which one sort of suits the track or fixes the problem best, basically. But that might buy us a little bit of breathing room on the low end. And maybe the same issue with that slightly out of balance tops. That's instantly nicer to my ears. So essentially that kind of helps to bring us back to how the better master was sounding, is just basically evening out things that sort of shouldn't be there or that create a problem. Because if we were to try and add a high shelf to this less good master now, those hi-hats are going to come out more than the snare, and you've got that imbalance in the top end that's just not going to get brighter in a good way, really. So that's really, you know, things to avoid. That if we were to now flick to the better one, now I'd sort of choose between a few options of adding some tops to that, basically, which will bring us, you know, to the brightness that the bad master had, but basically get us up to the level for mastering we want, which often is a lot of the job, is just adding some nice tops. So this is a really good one. This was by these Acoustica guys that I mentioned to you, which is like a sort of model of the Sontec EQ, which a lot of mastering guys used. I've seen in most studios. And the way they model it is that it's sort of impulse responses. So it actually sort of loads up samples of audio that effectively is you're putting it through, rather than it actually being a kind of, I don't know, a data algorithm model of it. So this one sounds great to me as an EQ. Really powerful. And that's instantly just the nice mastering top end machine. So I'd fiddle with a few, you know, similar settings. Often I'd have something like this on the mastering, just a really low and high roll-offs, sort of high pass and low pass, just to kind of contain any real low subs. But a big thing I'm into is not really low cutting much from mastering. That was something I learned from taking a lot of my tunes to mastering, is that it is quite a standard move to just have those roll-offs. but often even at 20 hertz, you can lose that low air. And there's a few tracks I've, had those options at mastering, and we've gone with the no low cut, because even at a real low sort of frequency, it can just lose that weight. So that's something I'm really aware of for drum and bass. For some more poppy music and stuff that you're not playing in a club, it's more car or radio stuff, that is often a pointless frequency to have, so you don't really want it. But for a lot of bass music, that's something I'm really careful of when I do the mastering, is to really hear what the low cuts are doing.
Yeah, because it's quite a standard move, isn't it? Oh,
yeah,
bypass everything, but actually,
and you can get away with it. This EQ, and generally I try and use sort of linear phase ones that don't create too many artifacts, but often it's a massive help. And there's tracks with low flappy stuff going on, it's like that's got to go, and you instantly clean it up. But if it's quite a good mix and you can already see on the meters there isn't loads of that low end 20 hertz stuff going on, I often wouldn't low cut it if it's mixed well, because it's not always beneficial. But yeah, that's something like that's often sort of first in the chain. And with the high one, what's nice about that is you can have your high shelf going on afterwards, and there isn't any mad high stuff getting brought up by the high shelf, having that low pass on first. And so yeah, now I'd probably, I'd compare a few different of these sort of mastering style high shelves and see which one. Again, it's difficult because like with this one, it doesn't have 12K, the other one's got 12K, and it's like the limiters, you can't quite exactly match things, so it's just sort of listening to the vibe of what you can get out of it. This is one of my favourites, the Bax EQ Dangerous. It's just got a really crispy, lovely top end. And actually, I've done it already. What's useful about this one is you can split the mid sides, and so often I'll use something like this to maybe just boost the sides a little bit, which will bring out some nice stereo, which generally kind of 10% on other things, or it's sort of 1 or 2 dBs is just a nice little mastering touch to just bring out the sides, which just adds that little bit extra. And if, for example, you start bringing out the sides and there's a bit too much transients or things going on, that's where I might bring in a multi-band set to mid-side mode, and you can just contain some of the peaks on the sides. If that's, if there's a lot of drums or kind of mad stuff going on the sides, that might need a bit of attention.
So you just smooth off the transients so that you can boost it a bit more?
So you can boost it a bit more and sort of get a bit more out of the sides, without them sounding too sort of pokey. And another little trick that I was taught going to these sessions with Bo, which occasionally on my tracks we use, was a nice bit of de-essing on the mastering chain. If you've got kind of harsh snares or harsh hats, it's essentially sort of the same as what I was doing with this with the Fab filter on the kind of bad mix here, was pulling down some of these things, but you can get some nice de-esser settings that just pay attention to that kind of 6-7K rather than the tops, and that's something which on this track we're doing I had on the master bus, but there's a couple of nice settings in this what's it called, Precision de-esser by UAD. So this master fader one gives you a little idea of what you can do with it. Sorry, the computer's a bit slow, with screen flow going on. So this can hear it, that's way too much, but that's the kind of area you can start smoothing off and taking out some of that kind of rattly snare, which just gives it a kind of mastered cleaned up and sort of sheeny sound. It kind of benefits that top shelf. So if the top shelf starts bringing out the high mids too much, you can just sort of tame them in a little bit with a de-esser. But it's not something I do a lot, because then you're back into the kind of messing with dynamics a little bit. So ideally, really, you know, probably at this stage, I'd just be looking for any other holes in the mix. Once you've maybe got a nice high shelf on, now I've got to choose, let's say between these two. I think that's set a little bit brighter. And it's often a tough choice when you've got a few nice top end things to choose from. So I might go touch more on this one, and possibly this could be the choice. So what will be interesting at this stage is maybe just jump back to the bad version. And now once the duller mix has actually got that high end on it, to me this bottom one, the better mix, is sounding much smoother on the top end. It's bright, but it's not pokey and spiky. And you feel like you could even add some more if you wanted. Whereas this one, still lumpy and still a bit spiky, and that's where basically just getting your frequencies as even as possible before mastering. Even if your track's really dull and a bit thin, if it's all evenly done, then when that comes up in mastering, you're going to get a nice even master. So I think that's something where everyone often goes on about supplying a quiet track. I know you were going to ask me that, of how loud do you supply your track to mastering. Although that matters, I think it's much more the balance in the mix that's actually the issue.
In terms of EQ? In
terms of EQ and the level of sounds, even just on faders, of, you know, sometimes you get things where just the hi-hats are so loud, the snares are really dull. That might be, or really quiet rather, that might be what they're going for in the genre, but to me those are more issues than actually, you know, how loud is the pre-master. Even if it's quite loud, if it's balanced well, you just need to do a few little touches and job's done, really. So, you know, that's something that, yeah, is the main thing to watch out for, and that I've massively learned from doing mastering and trying to master my own stuff, is the balance really that's gonna mess it up later. So yeah, I think that shows how a duller track with some tops at mastering, for me, comes back much smoother. And now it's the second thing. I know other people that master, there's the element of filling holes in the mix. I know this looks a bit jerky because we've got a few things going on, but you can see, for example, there's a little bit of a dip here at sort of 5 to 6K, which you might want to fill out, but you might not as well. And this is where it gets tricky in mastering. Have the producer left that hole in the frequencies. Often you get tunes, especially, you know, jungle style or whatever, it's got a big smiley face shape of not too much mids but a lot of bass and treble. Do you whack in a big load of mid to fill that hole, or are you just totally going against the actual sound they wanted? So that's generally where I'd err on the side of caution and think, let's assume that's what they wanted, and not try and, you know, fill a hole for the sake of it, because it might, to them and everyone else, sound better that way.
And I guess that's where it comes back to the fact that you're now doing mastering, you're not making your own music, so then it's like...
So I kind of know what it's like from there, but sometimes I'll get a master back, whoever's done it for me, and hear a little hole filled, and you're like, oh, I couldn't hear that, that's exactly what needed doing.
And it could be deficiency in the room or
Exactly,
something.
yeah. So I'll check those holes and do boost or opposite cuts if there's little resonances that are poking out, which is, you know, easier to spot on this bad mix. You know, I might even scoop a bit more out of that kick area where the kick's it's still a bit farty to me. So that's where you might be like, I need to find some frequencies, sort of 80 or kind of 140 maybe on this kick to try and free up a bit of room so that there's less of that level hitting the limiter. That's all we've got time for now. To see the rest of the video, check out this month's issue of Computer Music. And for mastering bookings through Cygnus, go to cygnusmusic.net.